Yeah, so I'm Jelle Millenaar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Impierce Technologies, and we are focused on connecting people and ecosystems. So today I would like to talk about, who is Impierce Technologies? What are our goals? What are we going to do? Then I would do the convergence of three very important trends, which are self-sovereign identity with the eIDAS 2.0 regulations in Europe and lifelong learning as a concept. And then I want to give a brief update on the identity wallet that we want to build, the entire identity stack alongside of it, and how we're planning to build an ecosystem. I do really want to check real quick if you can actually see this. Otherwise, I'm speaking to no one. But it's all good. Right? Can someone say that in the chat that you can see the slides, or when I'm on the slides? All right, I'll just assume that everything is going all right. So a little bit about me. I have a background in game programming and biology with a minor in AI, which is a little bit more relevant now. You will know me as previously being the lead of identity at the IOTA Foundation, which I was up until about a year ago. There I managed the development of the open source IOTA identity framework, and I designed the DID method for IOTA. And now I'm the CEO and co-founder of Impierce Technologies that you will hear a lot more about. So our goal as a company is to help with the problems that have arisen from the kind of digital transformation in society. Because of this whole lack of an identification layer on the internet, we see a lot of scams, phishing. We see a lot of privacy issues where data is not our own, identity is not our own, and there's a lot of bothersome processes that you have to go through when you're browsing online or signing up for services, such as slow and costly KYC processes that you need to go through. Also, somehow that most of us are still logging in with a username or password, or are relying on social logins for that. So yeah, these are a lot of things that that definitely can be improved. And to us, the root problem for this is identification and trust, which is missing on the internet. So we envision a world where privacy and digital trust are the default, and where this is just common to utilize. And self-sovereign identity is a key technology for this. As an organization, we find it very important that we follow certain values. Digital identity is a very sensitive topic. When you mention this to the average person, they will often see it as a very controlling and potentially something that the government is using or companies are using to take control more and track more of who you are. But the funny thing is that it's the exact opposite if done correctly. So we as a company see it as a ability, and that's why we find it important to do things right. So we always want to respect the privacy and security of the data of people using our software and companies using our software. We also find it very important to work with sustainable employment. We personally believe that treating your employees right is very important to have, run a good company and have the best results that you can get. And overall, this both comes together in the long-termism view that we have, which is basically always looking at long impact that certain decisions have. So yeah, like I said, as a company, we try to position ourselves as a social company. So we are a for-profit. We find it important to create a sustainable income from the software that we do that while achieving societal goals. So we see these things as equally important. So we want to increase privacy, increase trust online, and protect people from scams, for example. We want to set up a successful business with a sustainable growth. So even if we get a lot of success, we do think you lose control of your values. So let's actually talk about self-sovereign identity and the converging trends that I mentioned. So self-sovereign identity, often also kind of combined with decentralized identity is, of course, the idea where people are able to bring their own identity, control your own identity, and control your own data again. So I've often given this introduction, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the idea is that you will have a place on your computer or on your phone where you store your data and then share that with companies instead of companies just scraping the data from online or getting it from data aggregators without any of your personal control in that. And this is actually really exciting for companies as well, because essentially you are becoming the common interface. Instead of their databases, their solutions with a lot of other databases, data aggregators, and other data sources, they only need to integrate you. And then you can carry all the types of information that they need. So we're not just talking about user authentication, okay, but also sharing more data. Um, who you are, like an official high assurance identification from the government can be used, but you can also prove what kind of skills you have acquired over your life, your work experience, where you live, all kind of data that you want to share is the most important part of this, that you decide what data to share. So even though this topic has been around for quite a while, actually since 2016 at least, we haven't seen self-sovereign identity adopted on a large scale yet. We see a lot of standardizations efforts happening, and these are very important steps to make this happen. So we have verifiable credentials version 1.1 going towards a 2.0. DID has been standardized now, and the OpenID Foundation is doing some very important standardization on how to actually exchange that information, such as verifiable credentials with party. So why is the time now to be excited about self-sovereign identity if it's been a topic for so long, but it hasn't had much impact yet? And that is mainly due to the second converging trend, which is EIDAS. So EIDAS 2.0 is a new version of an existing regulation where EIDAS used to be a framework in the EU for user authentication and identification. And this works absolutely well in the Netherlands. So for example, I can use my digital ID in the Netherlands to log in, do my taxes, set up a company, and all sorts of things. And it's a very smooth experience. To the wants to use that as well. They're like, hey, that's a very powerful identity. It would be very nice to have that included in our processes. And they were simply not allowed because this was a government functionality, basically. So with EIDAS 2.0, we see that basically this identification system is opened up to the private sector. Even bigger is that it actually will be mandatory for a big part of the private sector as well. So you can think of financial institutions, educational institutions, and that's what I will highlight next. And they will actually implement principles. EIDAS 2.0 describes how people will be able to own their own data, own their own identity. They can then share this with their consent and completely in their control. So a big portion of this is an identity wallet. That is the one that would be citizen facing. And the EU has described how should such an identity wallet work, what kind of technical requirements does it have, what standards should it follow, and they've described that in the ARF or Architecture Reference Framework. And this was a very important step that they are going to follow the OpenID standards. So that is SIOP v2, OpenID for VP, and OpenID for VCI. These are three important standards that allow people to log in using a DID and then share verifiable credentials or gain verifiable credentials from the that. And this gives a lot of direction that the SSI community was looking for, because there were a lot of talks like, hey, we can use this standard, or people were making their own protocols. Honestly, when I was still part of the identity team, we also kind of made our own protocol, but based on work from and now we know OpenID is basically the winner, and we need to follow those standards. There's another standard, the ISO 18013-5 for mobile driver's licenses. This is basically much bigger in America and is already being adopted. And that will also be part of EIDAS 2.0. And that actually fits with the verifiable credential model as well. So there's some interoperability happening there. All this being said, the EIDAS network or the EIDAS regulation will use and most likely be hosted by governments. We will see if there will be a spot for decentralized PKI or not. And we do think that there is a shot that this will happen since the private sector will be way more involved and they don't just want to accept customs, for example. Otherwise, it's still an interesting thing to bridge multiple PKI systems within one wallet. The third trend is lifelong learning. And this one is something you might be familiar with. That's the idea of continuous learning and continuous skill development. So a complete tangent of what we've been talking about before. But when you are now applying for a new job and you say, well, I got this degree that is relevant in this field, but it's 20 years old, you're not going to get much for that anymore. It's much more about skills, latest development. Nowadays, it's, for example, pretty important. Are you able to use AI tooling in your work? Yeah, that kind of changes in the market. Are you familiar with Scrum methodology? Those kind of things. So we're working towards a more skill-based job market. And this is that the education itself has been isolated from a little bit. Because when you upskill yourself by following courses online, yeah, the question is, how many of you have done that? And if you did that, have you followed that at the university? I argue that most of you probably then did it at online learning platforms or at companies that followed, for example, a Scrum training. And the educational sector itself has isolated itself from this whole new type of learning, and that is costing them because there's always this expectation that you follow an entire degree multi-year. So what people nowadays want is a flexible learning pathway. You go to a platform, quickly sign up, follow a course. That's it. I don't want to sign up for a multi-year degree. I don't want to go through a KYC procedure, etc. So what you want is quickly go to the point, start following the course. And perhaps as a result, you also want something to show. So a lot of people get something that they can share on LinkedIn and say, yeah, I've now followed this course, so I'm now trained to follow X and Y. It would be very cool if this kind of system would be interoperable and would also be verifiable, so it could be used in a recruitment process. So the educational sector realized this. And that's why they made the open badges standard. This is created by OneAttack, and it's basically a verifiable credential for a skill. So let's three trends converge, but quickly I will also check if everything is still going all right and if we have any important questions. Yeah, it works. All right, great. So the three converge EIDAS and SSI. I talked a lot about that now already. But in the European legislation, you see more and more direction towards privacy compliance, towards more privacy for people and more control for people around their own identity and data. Basically, the big conclusion of that, where they're really implementing the SSI principles. And on the other end of the field, we see the educational sector moving towards from degrees more towards lifelong learning, a flexible learning pathway, and then in the end now open badges. Provide that ability to verify what kind of skills you have acquired during single courses. And the latest version of that standard, Open Badges version 3, is completely compatible with verifiable credentials. So again, these things are converging. Also see self-sovereign identity can provide. So what impact does this have on the educational sector? Well, that is that they are now moving towards more skill-based education and they can support faster career transitions. So just to give an example, in the Netherlands, we had a shortage of ICU, intensive care unit doctors during the COVID crisis. So we had to actually send patients to Germany. And we couldn't educate people to immediately work in the intensive care unit because obviously that's a multi-year degree of training that people need to follow. And this system that I'm now presenting, but there are people working in hospitals that are able to work on the ICU, but they had other responsibilities they couldn't just give up. So what we could have done if the system was more in place is train people much quicker to start doing jobs in hospitals. Very specific skills so they can certain responsibilities. So not following a multi-year nursing degree or doctor degree, but very specific, you can do these few things in a hospital. And then suddenly it's a matter of months, maybe even weeks before people can enter that labor shortage and solve it. And we can solve so this is a little bit of an extreme example. Most labor movements don't go that quickly. So this system has even more time to react to it. But waiting on entire degrees and updating degrees is way too slow for today's market. We also see that institutions like Harvard have a very big reputation. So if you have a degree of Harvard, that say something. So when we talk about badges, it's very important that they can also protect that brand, protect their name. So a verifiable badge means that people can't take at Harvard University. And that way they keep their reputation and there's more trust in this system. This does require much more closer collaboration between the market and educational institutions and to respond to labor movements. So we, as a company, Impierce Technologies, can help with that, with their transition into this new way of thinking, this new way that education will work. And that is, of course, by providing software that is EIDAS compliant, that can provide seamless onboarding, that can use verifiable badges as a prerequisite for courses. So schools can, do you have the right skills to follow? Or, of course, reward them when they have followed a course. And when we do this, because we are using the SSI principles, you basically get GDPR compliance for free. So how are we currently exploring this? Well, you may have already seen an announcement. But we set up a consortium, NGDIL, with the King Willem I College in the Netherlands. This is a school for about 20,000 students. And together we're basically looking at the opportunities in education. And this is KW1 name for them with Impierce Technologies, Tangle Labs, but also UNESCO Learning Cities, which has lifelong learning as a very important topic. So we're building a proof of concept that will be ready in September. And this will showcase how powerful the system will be, how easy it will be to issue badges, to verify badges, and also create a verifiable resume. Um, that's not where we end. That is basically, you can compare it to the self demos that we've done before, or that I've done before when I was working at the IOTA Foundation. It's basically a showcase of how it works. This one does take it quite a big step further because we're actually implementing this entire demo using existing OpenID standards. So all the technical components are completely in place, and the wallet that you will be using when you go through this demo could actually work with verifiable credentials for real life as well, instead of just this demo. Afterwards, we plan to use that demo to go to the region, onboard other schools, onboard other private parts in the system so that they too can join in and learn with us. Join us in a pilot for which we will apply for an either Dutch or EU grant. And yeah, beyond the pilot, we also want to eventually move this, of course, towards production in the region. Working at a school or at a company, in the Netherlands or nearby the Netherlands and you're interested in this, obviously you can contact us. You can also just find more information on ngdil.com or email me. So sector, and now I want to dive a little bit more into the IOTA identity ecosystem that I've been trying to build over the years. So I started the journey with IOTA in about 2017-18, where I realized the US in this field. And I really realized, hey, there are a lot of components that need to be built in order to get a functional ecosystem to work. And you can't all do that at the same time. So the first focus that I had was make sure that the software requirements are in, so that they can use it to build actual identity software. Then you need software for users and software for companies. So that is what I did with by joining the IOTA Foundation and setting up the IOTA Identity Framework. And now I set up Impierce Technologies, building on top of that framework to create software for users and companies. But that's not the full story. If you have the software, you also want adoption. So in order to get adoption, users want applications, and companies that build applications, they want to see demand from users. So that is very hard to start, but once it starts, it will grow itself. So that is basically the major challenge that we will have as an ecosystem. How do we start that cycle? So the ways that we personally are trying to do that is by following standards, own ecosystem, but that we can connect with ecosystems and therefore grow the ecosystems. Other ways are, of course, that we interact with a lot of parties. We're not trying to do this with ourselves, like Impierce Technologies builds the stacks, offers the things, and that's your only choice. So a lot of the components that we build will also be open source. And we welcome competitors, collaborators in that regard to also build alternative software, because in the end, you want to grow a big ecosystem. And I believe in 2018, do you want to have a big part of a small pie? So if you have a small ecosystem, but Impierce Technologies it rakes in most of the customers, or you can choose to have a bigger pie with a much smaller part. So the ecosystem is much larger, but Impierce Technologies has a smaller part in that. And for the mathematicians under you, you will realize that if it's a much bigger pie, then a small piece of that is still much bigger than the other option. Naturally, that still isn't the full story, because even if we have parties that are interested in the ecosystem, there are still requirements around building an identity for people. So you need useful credentials. Like if you guys have your identity wallet, but it's completely empty, then how are you going to use this? So our strategy work with partners to integrate into other parties and their services, and also offer our own issuance services, so that we will make sure that you will have at least some verifiable credentials to work with. The most important credential that you'll ever get is an high assurance verification credential. That's basically one that's either given out by a government. If it's slightly less high assurance, then so like we would call that substantial level, then you could think about a credential given out from your bank or a telco, but hard to get. So this is one of the reasons why we find it so important to have that eIDAS 2.0 compliance, because that can allow us to get these government-based credentials in your wallet, and you can use those to identify yourself on a very high level if you ever need to. Otherwise, you have procedures that you can do, and that is what I really want to support. So yeah, overall, it's a lot about collaboration and building an ecosystem together and not working in isolation. So what does it take to build an entire identity stack? Well, I've already talked about a lot of the components, but here's more complicated. So yeah, there are basically 4 stakeholder groups: the developers, which is what I try to focus on in the early stages. So they need a framework, they need a DID method, they need a good developer experience, and I think IOTA Identity is in a very good place for. What it is currently still missing due to the recent developments is that we see the OpenID standards becoming quite crucial, and that is something that the developers will need. So you can see it is colored yellow. This means that it's partially funded or and it's going to be open source. So yeah, one of the things that was announced yesterday is that Impierce Technologies has been granted a grant by the Tangle Treasury of 80,000 USDT in order to build an identity wallet. And this includes a full implementation of the OpenID standards, which is a major for developers as well. So on the user side, you can also see that identity wallet. It's EIDAS compliance. I will have to say that grant doesn't give full EIDAS compliance because that is actually quite difficult, but it sets us in the right direction. And everything that we're building standards, we just will need to build more over the years to be fully compliant. It will work with IOTA and Shimmer. It will use the different ledgers for the DID methods. And another component that users will need is kind of a self-control identity. So having your mobile identity wallet will only get you so far. For example, if you want to share your address with a company and that company is unable or wants to have access to your address, you need to give consent. So let's store that address, but it wants to re-request it whenever it needs it. Then suddenly during the day, you get a pop-up, oh, this company needs access to your address. So you need to open up your app and give consent again. If that's in the middle of the night, you obviously are not going to do it. Very often when you get a notification like that, you might decide to not do it. And this is annoying for companies. So then the whole SSI system doesn't really work. So it does work if this information is available in the cloud. So let's say you have an identity agent, an identity provider running in the cloud that represents you. Encrypted or isolated, so no one else can decrypt it unless you give specific access to that specific data point to certain companies. So you will use your identity wallet to say, hey, bank, here is my address. You can access it in this. It need to store your address, and then when it needs it, it can just get it from your cloud agent. So now when you move, you don't have to go to all 15 companies that are holding your address, or probably more, and tell them you've moved. What you do is you update your address in the cloud, and now every time one of those companies immediately get the latest version. And obviously, with the SSI principles, this information can also be verifiable. Therefore, companies can trust it even more. So this is an identity provider. We want to build this as Impierce Technologies. There's an asterisk in there because this is something that needs to be completely open source, or is this purely a service that we want to build? If it is a service, should it use certain standards so that other alternatives can also be built, so there's no lock-in to just using Impierce? That is pretty far away, if I have to say, other priorities that we have. So on the verifier side, there's also a lot of things that need to happen. So with the grant that we've been given by the Tangle Treasury, again, we will be implementing those OpenID standards. And this will be very useful for verifiers that want to receive information, because now they will have an implementation of a protocol to authenticate users and to receive data. This is a protocol that they'll need to implement themselves. There's no tool yet around it. That would be then the elDAS, Identity as a Service, for verifiers that you can see at the bottom. That is something as a service, because in the end, that's a much more complex piece of software. And there's a lot of reasons for verifiers to have that solved for them. In my experience, I see a lot of companies don't want to invent these types, have a developer framework and just implement it themselves. They rather just pay a company, give us the service, give us the software, and we'll happily use it. We don't want to learn all about the framework, etc. So that's why I find it very important that we offer that as a service to those companies. In some cases, a verifier can directly use the identity wallet themselves. So let's say you are trying to enter a concert and you got your tickets on your phone. In that case, you could just put up a QR code and the verifier in this case scans that QR code with their identity wallet in every ticket. So there's no need for an entire identity as a service model around that. So there's one piece that is red. That means that's not yet funded, but it is planned to be an open source contributions from Impierce Technologies. And that is the in-app extensions. And so I will talk about that in but quickly, it's the idea that inside the identity wallet, you will be able to have little extensions that add functionality to the wallet. And these can be very specific to certain verifiers. So you could have Ticketmaster displaying all of your entry tickets to concerts over the next months without bombarding you with all kind of other verifiable credentials that are not relevant for this particular use case. You can then also bring new services into the wallet, such as buy a new ticket from within the wallet directly. So we think actually an exciting and key piece in the puzzle to build an excellent identity ecosystem. So we still hope that this will be funded down the line. Issuer's perspective is honestly quite similar to the verifier's perspective. They too will have OpenID standards to work. They too have an identity wallet that they could directly issue from. They too would want those extensions so that you can easily gain credentials from a wallet that I will talk about more in a bit. But in the end, they will need to have a service dedicated for them. How do you credentials on a large scale? How do you manage the users that are attached to that? How do you revoke the relevant credentials, etc.? This requires an entire identity as a service module, and that's something we're planning to offer. But not just us. We don't want that. We don't want pure lock-in. For example, Tangle Labs is also building an identity as a service software, and we will very likely see many, many more parties. And that's great because we're trying to build a large ecosystem. So what is our roadmap for the identity wallet? Yes, I'm giving ETAs. I hope I will not regret this. Complete milestone in or before October of 2023 already. This is the part that is funded by the Tangle Treasury, and it will give you a base DID wallet with all the functionalities that you would expect for DID and verifiable credentials. So you will be able to create your identity credentials, share them with others. You will be able to log in with IOTA. We will be implementing that directly into the wallet. And we will be doing that using all of the OpenID standards directly. Something that is not particularly part of this grant, but that what we'll be doing is that we are going to become a member of the OpenID Foundation in order to follow their conformance testing, which means that we can actually validate that we followed these standards correctly. And then our goal is to get certified as well in the long term. Its testing and certification process is currently not yet available, but at the conference that I'm also at right now, I've learned that it is not far away. Another very important part of this first milestone that we're delivering is an OIDC SIOP. These are all OpenID standards. So OIDC is basically all of those login with Google, login with Facebook buttons. We want to make sure that companies can very easily add a login with IOTA or login with DID. We're not sure how it's going to be called yet. A similar button like that. Up such a button, if you already have login with Google, is literally 5 minutes of work. But that uses the OIDC standard. That is not a self-sovereign identity standard. So what we want to do is we want to bridge that to a self-sovereign identity standard. So you from your using self-sovereign identity. So you're presenting your decentralized identity, you're presenting your verifiable credentials. Then there will be a system in the middle that transforms that in the more classical OIDC system, and then presents that to the verifier in this case, often called the relying party. So this is not complete decentralization. So naturally, we hope companies will opt in towards SIOP, which is the completely decentralized version of that, but that requires much more effort for them to integrate. So this is basically extremely easy adoption at the slight sacrifice of decentralization, or a part of that at least. So we're building this wallet. We're building it open source, and we're building it for the community as well. So if you're a part of a community project and you want to make use of this wallet, please contact us. The sooner the better, and then we can already take in your requirements and start working with you to get this adopted at the first release as soon as possible. So yeah, the parts that are not yet approved by the Tangle Treasury, and we won't exactly know how that process will look like yet, but it's also not been accepted yet. So I assume that we will kind of see in a couple of months if we will also get these milestones funded. But if they do, it will take a couple of months until January 2024 to resolve milestone 2, which implements so this adds a lot more complexity due to the fact that we will need to now handle the IOTA token, the Shimmer token, etc. That also means that it makes a lot of sense to integrate with Firefly and other crypto wallets in the ecosystem. So we will be reaching out if they will be interested in creating a deep link between the wallets. So you can manage your identity in our identity wallet, but when you have to use your tokens in order to create those identities, you will deep link to Firefly to do all of that. Yeah, a very important part is that security. This is something we will want to continue to do over time, but that first milestone that we will initially deliver will have just encryption at rest for your data. But in the end, if you want to have a real identity wallet, you need to store those keys in the hardware elements in your phone, in your computer as well. And this is something that is part of milestone 2. This is also where we want to give back to the community. So we want to do more integration with community projects, and this is part of the grant. So that would be at our in milestone 3. Again, not yet approved. That's where we would build that extension system so that you have in the app the ability to choose yourself what kind of functionalities you would want to see. So let's say we would extend the identity wallet that you can own NFTs with your identity. A lot of you might get excited about that, but my mother and my grandma wouldn't really care about that. So the extension system basically allows you to opt in and opt out of certain functionalities and allows us to create isolated environments in the app with a very big focus on certain use cases. The cool part about that is that we can, even if the wallet goes multi-chain, so not just IOTA and Shimmer, but maybe also other cryptocurrencies, we can make certain functionalities only available to IOTA and Shimmer because naturally the implementation of the ID on IOTA and Shimmer and has many more features available to us. So we can actually create extensions dedicated to IOTA and Shimmer that showcase the power of our DLT without compromising the overall experience and only having to follow the average functionality of all DLTs. But that's not the only reason. For example, let's say you want to go through a KYC procedure. Why not have a small extension in the app that you can do all of that in the app? So you will install KYC extension, and it will help create a selfie, maybe scan your physical ID card, and then you will get in return a verifiable credential, and that will be the end of life for that particular extension in you because you just went through a process. It could also be a collection of NFTs that you can show may do voting for DAOs in these extensions, as long as they are tied to your identity. The idea is that these are basically identity functionalities, so they should be inside identity systems. Here too, we want to reach out to community projects and say, building this, if you're interested to be integrated directly into the identity wallet, talk to us and we can see if we can make it happen as part of this milestone. So yeah, as I said, we've been funded by the Tangle Treasury, and I want to also point out that everyone else is able to apply for that on the Tangle side. It's a process, I have to say. To compare, the EDF process often took several months, but this only took several weeks because they really spent a lot of their time immediately on researching the topics. This might change, of course, if more people apply at the same time. We did notice that the process is still being refined when we went through this. So we had to kind of guess what the expectations were from the committee, what kind of information they needed. So while they are still refining this process, I would like to share some personal tips if you want to apply, because we certainly didn't do everything right, but I'm still happy that we obviously got granted a grant. So I definitely recommend to talk with the committee and ask for guidance. What do they need to know from you? What do you want to tell them? Is that useful before you start writing so many pages of documents? You should definitely provide sufficient context and background information around the topic, because not everyone in the committee might be as familiar with it. You should definitely explain where the money goes. So our public document didn't actually explain too much, but we also had a private version that provided a little bit more details. And that was purely because we named some companies and we weren't sure if they wanted to be named public. But in there, for example, we mentioned that our breakdown is that the cost of developers is $30 per hour, and this is how many hours every milestone took. So the actual cost of our developers is much more, or at least more, but the rest is an investment that Impierce Technologies is using it. So I think this really helped with our application, and the more you provide, the better. So we also showcased demand from third parties. So we actually got some names, but I couldn't put that in public. So I do think that that also helped with our application. And I recommend that you show stability of your project. I think any company that applies and basically says, we want more grant money to stay alive, and there's no business model, yeah, that's a hard time for a treasury to invest in, of course. So these are just personal tips. I hope you can make use of them if you're trying to apply for the treasury, and good luck if you. So that's it from my side. I hope I did it on time. I think it actually was pretty good. So if you want to reach out to me, here's my email address. If you want to find more, if you want to follow Impierce Technologies, you can follow one of our socials. And hopefully this got you a little bit excited about the and the identity wallet that has now been funded. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the talk, Jelle. First of all, congrats on the grant for Impierce Technologies.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very happy about that.
So you just received it yesterday, right? The news for the grant. So how did you
Yeah.
feel about that?
Yeah,
Did
super
some party
excited.
with the team?
I wish I was honestly alone in my hotel, so I couldn't really party, but I did of course call the rest of the team. And it's an awesome step, right? Because as a startup, you don't have too much funding, and when you commit yourself to an open source project that in itself, the identity wallet doesn't have a very strong business model, but it's purely an enabler. You really do need some support. So it's really important to us, and this really opens up doors. So we're quite happy with it. Yes.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I mean, it's an exciting way to start the day, right, with such great news.
Absolutely.
So very happy, and thanks a lot for the tips on how to get yourself into the Tangle Treasury. Maybe a question from my side. You were mentioning that you have to provide some kind of plan where the money goes, right? So maybe to get in more detail, if some devs want to participate in that or so, does it have to look like a business plan or something like that, or could it be made more loosely, like a short
Well,
white paper? So
yeah, so obviously I'm not part of the committee, right? So you'll need to decide what you think is the right information to give. But I didn't mean indeed a full business model, but mostly you're asking money. It's probably a good idea to be spending this on development. We expect it would take this many man hours, therefore this is the cost. Or perhaps you want to hire external resources. We found out this is how much it costs. So I think what is always a challenge for crypto grants is that sometimes people apply and they ask for a lot of money, and you're like, are they just going to pocket it and run away? Or are they actually going to invest it in the project? So you need to build that trust, and providing more information should be helpful. At least that's what I would think.
all right. And how long did it take you for an answer from the committee? So do you have that roughly in mind?
I think it was about 3 weeks since our submission. We did submit immediately with a lot of information. So I think that did help. At the same time, maybe ours took a little bit longer because there were on it. The Treasury lead, if that is the correct title, also wrote down a breakdown of the process. So you should definitely have a read of that if you're interested. But they apparently had a lot of internal discussions, and that might actually have delayed it. So perhaps even.
Right, but I have to say 3 weeks is fairly fast
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
something like that.
Absolutely.
All right. And you were mentioning that you were into the whole DID SSI um, field since 2017. What were your first touch point with that? How did you get into that field, or how did you break into that bubble, so to speak of?
Yeah, so I realized that yeah, when you're interacting with people online, but also in smart contracts. For example, that didn't exist at the time. I was going to say NFTs, but I suppose with ICOs, that was more of a thing in 2017. If you wanted to figure out like, hey, am I actually buying the token from the right team? Am I interacting with the right smart contract? Who is writing this smart contract? These are all identification problems. And when we want to use blockchain, can we actually also solve the identification problems outside the normal blockchain world? So these kind of ideas came into my mind, and I actually then found out, hey, that's not a unique idea. Self-sovereign identity is already being developed, but the frameworks for it were pretty poor. The experience to work with it was pretty poor, and yeah, there were a lot of fees behind creating an identity. So then I was like, hey, what if we can do it in a cheaper way, or perhaps without needing to own a token? I came to IOTA and figured perhaps IOTA is also the perfect place to put identities on.
So you got your roots in from Ethereum, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Right. So you were basically starting from crypto, then tried to, I don't know, break down the technology a little bit, maybe see some use cases that would be important for the future, and that's how you came to be or to go into that specific field. All right.
Yeah, I got a part-time job as a blockchain consultant at an IT provider in the Netherlands, and they basically said, hey, we want to, current trend, 2017 hype cycle at the time. Um, and yeah, they kind of let me figure out exactly the details because I already knew a lot about blockchain because I just found it interesting. And they were basically, hey, how can this help our customers? And personally, I then came to the realization that identity is by far the strongest use case for distributed ledger technology. So that's what I told them, and they allowed me to explore more about it and start building that.
I mean, it's really cool to hear that you were kind of one of the early supporters or early people that were into that kind of technology. I mean, it kind of reminds me the same with the NFT people, right? In 2017, when they were just barely coming out, smart contracts, people were playing around with the ether rocks and whatever the name of these projects were. And everyone was just laughing at them. They were the laughing stock of the whole crypto world. Like, who would pay that much transaction fees for just one token and stuff like that? And now we see that the hype came. Everyone saw the use case of that specific technology, and it feels like the same is now happening to the whole DID SSI topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. At the conference that I'm currently also at, the European Identity and Cloud Conference, you really see that a lot of bigger parties are getting into SSI. There was a talk today about ping identity, also looking at verifiable identity providers, and many more. The OpenID Foundation is working with so many standards. I do have to say that a lot of them don't really use the DLT aspect of it, but at least the SSI topic is really gaining traction in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even maybe to come back to what you just said, I know of a couple of companies, maybe even bigger banks, that are just trying to get into that field. And through DLT technologies, I think, what is it called, a Commerzbank, for instance, I know for a fact that they are looking for stuff like that, and even are prototyping some kind of digital ID wallet with maybe the same standards that you just presented to us with the eIDAS and stuff like that, right? So it's definitely an exciting time to be breaking into that space. Even I have to add to that, we here at Byte5 are also working towards a similar goal that you just provided. But you said you welcome the competition, right? So that we can grow a big pie and then each have a small chunk out of that.
Absolutely, yeah. Identity doesn't work on a small scale, so it either is going to be adopted on a large scale, which is basically just going to happen, at least for SSI, or yeah, on small scale it just doesn't work.
And so maybe a little bit more info on the application you guys are building at Impierce Technology. So you're planning to have an app and a web extension release, right? So any ETAs on that one? When can the people
So
be downloading it and start testing it?
yeah, so the mobile wallet, that is milestone 1, which is funded. That should be done in or before October. And that will be for Android, iOS. We don't know if we will need also extension to avoid it, because web extensions are a less secure environment to work in, and we rather stay in secure environments since we're working with such sensitive information. But milestone 2 also includes a desktop application, so that would then be for if I say, which you can look that back up in my slides if you're interested. Yeah.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna be honest with you, and of course I'll be testing it out and see what you did there.
Awesome.
All right. So maybe another question that we've got, or maybe some kind of observation from the chat that I just saw, and Albert Olive said this is like MetaMask snaps. Does it ring a bell for you? Because I'm not really sure what Albert was referring to here.
No, I actually don't know MetaMask snaps,
All right, then we're
but
going
that
to
might
skip
be
that one.
extent functionality of the attention system. Yeah, so overall, it's basically a kind of a composite app, right? Like where our app also implements functionality from other applications in kind of a very focused and limited way. Common path, not something we're trying to be unique about, but we are definitely unique in the way that we're using that in an identity wallet and using it to highlight the strengths of certain chains such as IOTA.
All right. And maybe as a last question, of course, you talked a lot about the mobile app and the possible extension that you're going to develop at Impierce Technology. Is there anything else on the horizon that you want to talk about maybe for the listeners right now?
Yeah, so right now the identity wallet is obviously our priority with the OpenID standards as well, which we will be releasing open source. After that, I talked a little bit about the identity as a service product that we want to build, but this is quite a bit further out. The proof of concept that we're doing with the NGDIL consortium in September is quite exciting. So I'd see a lot more public updates on what we're doing. Unfortunately, it takes some time to set up a company, so it took me about a year to really get to this point that we can actually have an impact again on the community. But I'm very happy that we're now at this point, and from now on, you should see more regular updates from us.
We'll be definitely looking forward to this, I think. Is there anything else that you want to share as a last, maybe exit sentence or something like that?
No, not really. Maybe follow us on the socials if you're interested. And yeah, otherwise, I wish you guys a very nice TangleCon.